So I think it's safe to say the majority of people my age were likely obsessed with Pokemon growing up. And why wouldn't we be? There was colorful cool creatures, a likable protagonist in the anime,
Those guys aren't hitters. I've seen better swings on a playground. Not like some other girls who treat you bad and look even worse.
and all the merch that a little boy or girl could dream of consuming. I myself am 32, and the majority of my life I've loved Pokemon, and I just thought it would be fun to go through a nostalgic journey of how it was to grow up with Pokemon. So let's take it back to 1998. Pokemon was the hot craze. Having been released in Japan about 2 years prior, most of us didn't know about Pokemon yet until the anime hit our TV screens and consumed our lives.
I wanna be the very best, like no one ever was.
My all-time favorite anime episode is the one where the Pokemon all get separated from their trainers and they're just like talking amongst each other the whole time. I don't know, I thought that was so cool, getting to know their personalities, and I don't know, the vibes in this scene, man, immaculate. So when it comes to a 5-year-old seeing the Pokemon anime for the first time, well, you can imagine I wanted everything Pokemon. You know, I won't bore you with like a sob story or anything like that, but it'll help me tell the story a little bit better to let you know that off the bat, my family growing up was pretty broke. We lived in a not so great neighborhood in Arizona, and we initially shared our house with like 2 other families. If you haven't guessed by now, I am Hispanic. But credit to where it's due, my parents early on did the best they could, and I appreciate that looking back. But kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, needless to say, you know, my family couldn't afford much. But honestly, I do remember from time to time, my sisters and I did get some cool stuff. And the very first piece of Pokemon media that I received was Pokemon Red. How I got Pokemon Red is kind of a funny story. So my uncle was, let's just say, he had similar traits to Robin Hood, and in his ventures, he stumbled upon a Game Boy Color in like pristine condition. This was like around Christmas time, I believe, and so he sold this Game Boy for a reasonable price, I'm assuming, to my parents. And you know, I went bonkers over having my own Game Boy, and with what I'm assuming was the money that he made from my folks. That same night, he took me to Walmart, and as a Christmas present, he bought me Pokemon Red. I was absolutely hooked. At the time, I recall sharing a room with my sisters, but that night, I snuck off to like the bathroom so I could have the light on and play as long as I could. If you've never played an original Game Boy or Game Boy Color, you may not know that they had no backlight, so you needed light to be able to play anything at night. So then I recall on actual Christmas Day in 1999, my uncle came through once again and got me Pokemon cards. I was so freaking obsessed with those damn pieces of cardboard. I mean, as like every other kid in 1999 was. I remember though getting a freaking binder full of already organized and sorted out holographic cards mixed in with like sports cards as well. And at that time, I thought it was so cool in my child mind. You know, I thought my uncle opened up a bunch of packs and organized the cards, but nope, he stole them. I would later on realize that he legitimately stole this binder, you know, as is, and just gifted it to me like that. But you know, I was happy as hell, so whatever. I had a freaking holographic Charizard in there. But I remember my cousin duped me out of my holographic Charizard. He convinced me that Machamp could beat Charizard in a battle. So yeah, he convinced me to trade him my Charizard for his Machamp. I still remember that. But you know what? I can't hold a grudge because years later, he let me borrow his Yu-Gi-Oh deck that had like Exodia in it. And that's when it was like newish, you know, like the cards were pretty new. So it was worth quite a bit. Yeah, and I got it stolen in school. So he lost Exodia, I lost Charizard. Not quite an even trade, but you know, it's fine. We were still besties despite these tragedies. But anyway, back to Pokemon. Yeah, I remember like most of the year in 1999, Pokemon was all a young 6-year-old boy could think about. Then one spring day in April, Pokemon in 3D released. Like, if y'all didn't live these days, y'all don't understand how insane this was to us. Pokemon in 3D was unreal. For my 6th birthday, my folks did manage to get me a Nintendo 64. Sure, it was already open, but I won't bore you with the details of why it was already open. But I could not care less because I had the most revolutionary piece of gaming technology to grace the universe at the time. But I didn't get Pokemon Stadium when it first came out. I guess the opportunity for my family to get it for a cheap price hadn't arose yet. But I do remember once in a while we would get the chance to go to Blockbuster Video, and I was always praying to Jeepus Christ that they had a copy of Pokemon Stadium ready to rent for the week. And then Christmas 1999. If you don't know, Hispanics really celebrate Christmas on December 24th, and at midnight they do the gifts. That night, my sisters and I got a collective gift box, and that box had like 10 VHS. We loved movies, and I remember we were just super stoked. So we were content, but then, the next morning, we each got a mystery gift. My younger sister got an Angelica doll, my older sister got a Game Boy game, and I got Pokemon Stadium. Man, y'all don't know how hype I was. I was over the moon. So yeah, that was my life as a 6-year-old, playing Pokemon nonstop, whether it was the cards, Pokemon Red, or Pokemon Stadium. And to be able to move my Charizard, my ride or die, over to Pokemon Stadium and see my little guy on the screen, it felt like the most realistic that I've ever seen in my life. Man, that was insane. Y'all just had to be there. So then, as we journey through the Pokemon timeline, we get to Gen 2. I recall once again getting my gold version in 2000 for Christmas. I started off the new year with a badass red shiny Gyarados. I mean, what else could a young boy ask for? Following gold, I myself never owned Pokemon Stadium 2 as a child, but I remember vividly when my aunt bought it for my cousin at Sam's Club. We were in the back seat heading back to his house, and we couldn't stop staring at the box in awe, reading it and talking about how crazy this game was going to be. We loved the mini games, and that's the first thing we did when we got to his house. When I used to stay at his place, his mom never really cared about how late we stayed up, so we must have stayed up all night playing that game. We would do blind battles where we'd face away from the screen and choose random Pokemon. He somehow always got the strongest Pokemon. He later told me that he used to cheat by looking at my pupils. Bastard. So, a couple years went by. My family, for about 2 to 3 years, happened to have a slight twist of fate financially, and we had a decent middle class money for a couple of years. This unfortunately didn't last too long, but it was just enough to get the chance to get myself a Game Boy Advance for Christmas in 2002, and just 3 months later, I got my hands on a game that I believe revolutionized the Pokemon franchise. This game was, man, I can't even describe it. It was revolutionary. For a kid who has been growing up with the franchise, going from this in Gen 2, and keep in mind, I didn't even play Crystal when I was a kid, so Gold was all I knew. So the sprites were stationary, the menus were But going from what we had in Gen 2 to Gen 3 was a huge leap. The sprites in the menus were like the actual Pokemon. The boxes in the PC were so easily managed. The graphics were bright and beautiful. The attacks looked amazing. There was double battles. And you could run. Shoot, that was insane. I tend to say that Pokemon Red is my all-time favorite Pokemon game. But it's really hard to decide because Pokemon Ruby, I think, has left the longest lasting impression on me. Like Gen 3 is typically what I go back to when I do like a random quick Pokemon run on, one of my retro devices or even on my phone emulator. I think Gen 3 might just be my all-time favorite. And I tend to say Pokemon Ruby is my go-to because that's what I had as a kid. I don't think I played Emerald until I was like a lot older, to be honest. But what I also did get around this time was Fire Red. This game was like the first time that I think I got a Pokemon game like on release date. I recall my cousin, since he was older, told his mom to take us to GameStop, and I want to say that we might have pre-ordered the games. My memory is a bit fuzzy on this, but I think we did, because the day it came out, I remember his mom taking us to GameStop to pick up our games. So I don't know. I got Fire Red, he got Leaf Green, and damn, I think this might have been the first time in my childhood life up to this point where nostalgia hit me. Getting to see the Kanto region again in this beautiful bright art style, like getting to run. I mean, I can't stress enough how spoiled the new gen Pokemon fans are. Like, running was such a big deal to us OGs, and I was able to run in the Kanto region. I don't know, that was crazy to me. So around this time, as a Pokemon fan, we was eating pretty good. Gen 3 games held me over for a long time because, well, they kind of had to. In my personal life, my family had, once again, issues, mostly financial. We even moved out of the country for a couple of years, and anything valuable that I owned was basically sold off out there. I didn't really have gaming devices except for, I think, a PS2 that was mostly used as like our family DVD player out there. But I didn't really have my Pokemon games with me anymore. And so for a while, I didn't play Pokemon games. My favorite thing ever as a kid was removed from my life. My family did eventually move back to the US. We still didn't have the means to purchase like any real gaming devices for me. So I missed out on that DS era of Pokemon games, unfortunately. So, and this is where one of my hottest takes comes from. I don't really care that much for Gen 4. I just don't. And, I think you can see why. I always associate Gen 4 with that time in my life where my family struggled through a lot. So I don't have any nostalgia for it, like, whatsoever. Gen 4 did eventually grow on me a little bit, but it's the region that I probably visit the least. Around this time, though, like early high school days, we did have a hand-me-down computer that we got from my cousin, and he showed me the greatest thing ever: emulators. I was able to once again play all my favorite Pokemon games. Eventually, I was able to finally play Gen 4, including Heart Gold, the masterpiece that everyone hyped up for years. And it's one of those few things that I feel people properly rated because that game is amazing. Arguably the best Pokemon game ever made. Ruby is still my favorite, but objectively, Heart Gold probably is the peak of quality in the Pokemon franchise. Then Gen 5 came around. I had just graduated high school. I remember seeing the new starters in like a poster or something at the card shop. I was super into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh at the time, and when I saw these starters, I legit thought that they were fake. Like, I could not believe that Pokemon legitimately greenlit this. Snivy has got to be one of the worst designed Pokemons of all time. Like, I swear on everything that I legit thought these were fan-made ROM hack fake mons. I'm not really a hateful person. I'm pretty chill overall. There's very few things that I hate. And I think that Snivy's Pokemon design is like in my top 3 things that I hate ever. Tepig isn't great, but compared to Snivy, that dude is like Greninja level of design. Oshawott gets a pass because he looks like a Pokemon design, but still, I think that this is like the weakest trio of starter Pokemons hands down. So around this time, I did get my first real job, like full-time job. I started finally able to buy things for myself other than food and gas and bills. And I kid you not, the very first thing that I bought with my first batch of disposable income was, you guessed it, Pokemon games. My cousin had that OG DS with like the GBA cartridge insert, and he got himself, I think, a 3DS, so he gave me his old one. And then we went and got Heart Gold and Soul Silver, back when they were like still only $35 at GameStop. And along with that, we also got Black and White 2. This was the first time that I had bought a new release from Pokemon since Fire Red. 8 years in the making. I was super excited. At this point, I was 19. I had already moved out from my parents' house for like over a year. My cousin and I were living together, barely making ends meet. But we'd be damned if we didn't have some glimmer of happiness in our lives and that to us was Pokemon. My favorite Pokemon of all time came from that playthrough of Y2, Haxorus. When I first caught that Axew, I didn't know that it would grow into what would, for some reason, just leave me in awe. I know that it's not the greatest Pokemon design ever, but I don't know, I just absolutely love Haxorus. I think he's so freaking cool, and his shiny is even better. So, the DS era of games for Pokemon consumed me, especially Hard Gold. I was so obsessed with that game. In this time of my life, I was working, going to school, and my escape was Pokemon once again. Of course, I did also play a lot of Black Ops 2 at that time, Call of Duty. So then Xbox One came out, and I, for some reason, bought it, and it was just a disappointment, really. I thought that it was going to bring me the same enjoyment that the Xbox 360 did, but then Pokemon X and Y was about to drop. I didn't have the extra cash to get me a 3DS since I was still rocking that oldie DS. So I said, F it. I traded in my Xbox One for a 3DS and some cash just so that I was prepared for the launch of what I considered the next Pokemon Ruby, the game that once again revolutionized Pokemon. I know a lot of people didn't care much for X and Y. There's complaints about how easy it was, and there's just a lot of discourse. But I absolutely loved the game. It took us to like a whole new level of graphics within Pokemon. I know it's not much compared to like other genre of gaming and like era-defining games in the industry as a whole, but for Pokemon fans, this game really did push that extra bit of boundary for us. We had more free-form movement, the graphics had an increase, believe it or not, and Mega Evolutions were super cool. I don't know, I just really love this game. I started my adventure with Delphox because the Fire Wizard Mage concept was so cool to me, and it was Fire Psychic. This game is when I got really into shiny hunting as well. Around this time, I was working a weird security job where I did like 12-hour shifts from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and I didn't do much at this job, so I was able to just take my 3DS with me and I played X and Y for hours. And yes, I mean plural because I played both games. One of them had all my Pokemon, that I would like, all my strong Pokemon that I would catch or whatever. I just move it to one game. And then the other game was just for funsies, where I would beat the game over and over again with new and different Pokemon. I was so into the game that I was on Facebook groups that held like tournaments and even had their own gym challenges. Yes, gym challenges with like within the group, there would be designated gym leaders. Just random people who each had a designated typing, and you had to beat them in order to receive a badge. And this quote-unquote badge was a Pokemon that they would breed, so it had like their unique player ID attached to it. Once you beat 8 of the gym group leaders, you would then face off with like the champion of the group, and if you won the full challenge including the champion, you would get some shiny Pokemon and a bunch of Master Balls. This is when people started like creating items and Pokemon on computers and transferring them to their games. Well, I was so into these, challenges that a group asked me to become one of their leaders. I was the dragon leader of this group because, I loved dragon Pokemon and especially my love for Haxorus. So in my team, I had a shiny Haxorus as my ace. I had a regular Haxorus as, just like a throwaway. Hydreigon, Gumi, Charizard, and a shiny Dragonite that I had caught while shiny hunting one random day at work. Also, this game had that Wonder Trade, or I think they call it GTS system, that was like super cool to trade for random Pokemon or to hunt for Pokemon that you needed to complete the Pokedex. And I don't know, I really miss those days. This game was just really, really cool. Then a couple years later, we got Gen 7. The Alola region, and yeah, I mean, I didn't care for this one. This to me felt like such a step back from X and Y. I know that it has its defenders, and I get that they wanted to try something a little different, and I applaud the effort. I really do, to do something different, but it didn't have to be this bad. However, while the games weren't great, it did have some really cool Pokemon. Golisopod and Lycanroc I think are up there as far as cool designs go, and the starters were actually really solid. You know, that's a dark, cool wrestling fire tiger cat thing. It's just really cool. And then the Robin Hood-esque owl that, you know, was grass and ghost. Like, that typing was sick. And Decidueye design in general is just really sick. And I like the idea of some of the Alolan variants. You know, like, I did enjoy two of my all-time favorite Pokemon getting new forms. You know, Muck and Golem. You know, there were some stinkers, though. So, Gen 7 was, you know, it was alright. But then we got what could possibly be considered the greatest console of all time, the Nintendo Switch. I don't think some of y'all have truly realized how industry defining and revolutionary the Switch is or was, and what it has been for Nintendo gamers, or even gamers in general. Like, some of y'all are going to look back at what was the Nintendo Switch's life, especially early on, and realize that this did more for gamers than you realize. That on its own is probably a separate video, because so far I've been talking about mostly Pokemon, but behind that I have a lot of general gaming stories and, you know, a whole life as a gamer that we can journey through as well. But this is about Pokemon right now. So the Nintendo Switch was cool because since this is the first time in a very, very long time that Nintendo was no longer doing a dedicated handheld and a home console, it was merging into one system now. And a lot of fans were asking, does this mean Pokemon, like mainline Pokemon games as in Gen 8, was coming to a home console? The answer was yes. But before that, we do have to back up just a little bit to a time in humanity when, for the first time in modern history, the world was at peace. If y'all were around my age in 2016, you were probably stressed. You didn't know which way this political division was going to take us in. And I don't know if people already forgot, but 2016 was wild. So many crazy things happened that year alone. Shoot, 2016 might be its own video someday, honestly. But the light at the end of that tunnel was a silly mobile app game that no one realized how impactful it was going to be. Pokemon Go was everything we wanted as kids and what I personally dreamed of. Like being able to go around our world and catch Pokemon that exist in the wild in our dimension, I guess. Like, yo, that was freaking awesome. And it wasn't just the gamers and Pokemon nerds. It was literally everyone. So at that time, I lived across the street from like this entertainment district that had a lot of poppin' bars and restaurants and like a movie theater, Dave and Buster's, stuff like that. And you know, it was hot amongst like people my age, like, you know, early to mid 20s. That's like 90% of the reason my cousin and I and her girlfriend moved there, was to be like around the bars. So when Pokemon Go came out, this entertainment district like got packed. Like, it was already popular, but it was never packed. There'd be dudes and ladies dressed for a night out at the bar, dressed like they were about to be dancing in a Lil Wayne video, out there catching Pokemon. You know, sure, they were mispronouncing, you know, the Pokemon, talking about like Taurus and Lapras. But, you know, they were having fun, and the community was accepting of everyone that just wanted to catch them some Pokemon and complete the Pokedex. Someone would find a rare Pokemon and hordes of people like would trample on over, and everyone would just go silent as their Pokeballs wiggled around. You know, it was such an experience. And yeah, someone who used to go out to the bars and party a lot during that time, seeing people deliberately leave a bar to go and find that Nidoking that was a few bars down was just so awesome to witness. You'd see a mix of like people that were obviously out there to like party, mixed with like, you know, middle-aged dudes bringing their kids. Like, everybody was just standing next to each other catching Pokemon. It was just wild to see. So fast forward a little bit back to the Switch. The first Pokemon game that came out for the Switch was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, reimaginings of the original games, more specifically of the yellow version. This time with the choice of getting an Eevee instead if you bought Let's Go Eevee. I personally chose the Pikachu version because, you know, I absolutely loved Pikachu. And there's a specific nostalgia that comes with that game for me. Like, the day it released, I actually left work early. I believe it was a Friday. and I drove to California because I was meeting up for a second date with who I now call my wife. At that time, we had been friends for years, but about a month prior, we had our first date, and this time I was driving out there for a second date. That weekend, we ended up becoming official boyfriend and girlfriend, and I remember playing the game for the first time after our date, and I don't know, so I kind of associate that game with that time in my life. But yeah, gameplay-wise, this game was different. The catching mechanic was inspired by Pokemon Go. You had to fling the ball like kind of like in the mobile game, and you didn't battle the wild Pokemon, you just kind of leveled up by catching. It was interesting for sure. I don't think it was bad. I once again applaud the effort for trying something different. But, I was growing a bit fatigued of the experimenting that wasn't working out that well. I wanted Pokemon back, like real Pokemon. And what we got next was Gen 8, Sword and Shield. I know that once again there's some backlash. There was a lot of complaints about this game, whether graphically or about just how easy it was, or people just didn't like the gigantic Pokemon because, ever since X and Y, the Mega Evolutions, they've been cooking up gimmicks like the Z moves, the Max Pokemon, and then Crystallization. But I thought the Dynamax was pretty decent. But it was the feel of the game that I loved about Sword and Shield. And while I was already really into battling during the X and Y era, Sword and Shield is where I got really into like proper breeding and stats with Pokemon because I got insanely into online battling. I spent over 500 hours on that game because of how much I would battle online and breed Pokemon and shiny hatch. I was on Facebook groups and Discord groups trading and helping people out and battling and trying to come up with meta strategies. Like, this game consumed me. Say what you want about Sword and Shield, but this game was a lot better than people give it credit for. And to me, again, there's a lot of nostalgia around this as well because, as I mentioned earlier, a year prior, I started dating, who would eventually become my wife. But at that time, we had only been dating like a little bit under a year when I made the move out to California officially to be with her. I was able to transfer with my job. I was new to the city, to the state, with her family. It was a whole new life for me. And just 2 months after I moved in, I went and picked up this game at GameStop. And I don't know, I think subconsciously, I think it helped. And it was kind of like coincidental that Pokemon was trying this whole new thing. It came to a home console for the first time. The graphics were grander and more polished than ever. And yes, I know there's some ugly graphics and some ugly ass trees. I know. It was like a whole new life for Pokemon, and I was entering a new life and like chapter for myself. So I don't know. There was just like a cool spiritual alignments there that I thought was a cool little parallel with my own life. And don't get me started on the pandemic. And like I mentioned earlier, part of my obsession with this game is that it did help me get through the lockdowns. So yeah, I don't know. This game was with me during like a crucial time in the adult millennial timeline. So after Gen 8 had been out for a while, it was time for Pokemon to start moving forward. But of course, before that happened, we had to get some remakes and some spin-offs. We got the Gen 4 remake, and I told y'all about my lack of nostalgia for Gen 4, but this right here, I don't think I have to defend my reasoning for hating this game, right? Like, we all know how bad this remake was, right? But Pokemon redeemed themselves really shortly after with Legends Arceus. Legends Arceus was a fantastic addition to the franchise. I didn't fully touch on the fact that in Sword and Shield, we had Pokemon in the wild. I don't know why I didn't touch on that, but having Pokemon in the wild was so freaking cool, and Legends Arceus took that to a whole new level. Yeah, the world was a bit bare, and the game revolved around the catching mechanic a little too much, but this is the right move forward for Pokemon. Being able to just throw a Pokeball in the overworld at a Pokemon is what the franchise had been leading up to. And of course, if you fail, you enter a battle, and even the battle system was so smooth, and the fact that you could move around, and the transition between, the battle and, busting out the Pokemon, I don't know, it was so cool and so well, incorporated. This was an evolution for the franchise. Nope, no pun intended. So this game got us really hyped for what was to come next with Gen 9. And then, Scarlet and Violet released. I know the game had an awful rollout with the quality of these games, and I understand the criticisms, especially for this one more than any other time that Pokemon had been criticized. The games should not have released in this state, and there's no reason why the wealthiest franchise in the world, not even just in the gaming industry, in the world, should have released a product this subpar. But I think you already know what's coming. I actually enjoyed it. Alright, look, I get it. We deserve better. The fans deserve better, and we know it. Well, most of us know it. But Nintendo knows we're going to buy these games regardless, and I don't know. I was one of those few lucky folks who didn't actually have that many issues. The only real performance issues I saw were like the frame drops, but I don't know, my games never got any of those weird glitches. I'm sorry, I just never saw it on my personal playthrough. So, needless to say, as ugly as these games were in some areas and as awful as the frames sometimes got, I don't know, I had a great time with this game. I played through Scarlet and I had a blast. I must have spent like 20 hours just running around, exploring every nook and cranny before I even got to like the second or third gym. I tried doing the gyms out of order, and of course I got clapped. But that was part of the fun for me. I tried catching Pokemon that were like way too high leveled, and I was able to not catch them. I don't know, it was a great time just exploring this open world. Sure, it was barren a lot, and I don't know, I enjoyed riding around and seeing what else I could catch. I avoided as many spoilers as I could on the Pokemon that were going to be in this game because I wanted to experience it all firsthand. And I gotta say, Ceruledge is hands down one of the coolest Pokemon designs ever, period. I'd say it's top 5 for me, but I'd even say it might low-key even be my second favorite Pokemon design ever, just after my beloved Haxorus, of course. So this is kind of where we're at now in present day with Pokemon, March or maybe April, depending when I decide to work on this video, early 2025. We have Legends ZA on the horizon. I'm interested to see how that turns out, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it. We have people scalping the absolute crap out of Pokemon cards. I don't know if millennials are the problem here or if it's Gen Z that's causing these supply shortages on the product. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and blame us millennials. I'm really excited and nervous for Gen 10 with the Switch 2 releasing soon. I'm just hoping that Game Freak and Pokemon please allow another studio to help them make this game. Like this is going to be Gen 10. It needs to be the biggest one yet. It needs to be grand and amazing, and they need help because Game Freak kind of really sucks at making 3D games. They need more assistance, please, Nintendo, please. I'm assuming that we're going to start hearing about the next gen of Pokemon probably towards the first half of 2026. So, we'll see how this turns out. Legends ZA will be the first Pokemon game that I play as a married man, so I don't know, who knows, maybe by the time Gen 10 comes around in my life, there will be more changes that coincide with the new releases and more beautiful memories to associate the beautiful world of Pokemon with. I know that Pokemon means a lot to a lot of millennials. It's been there with us in trying times, in ups and downs. Not to have like a pity party for my generation, but we have seen and been through a lot of crap. And like I talked about in my previous video, that's why we run back to comfort media so much. Pokemon to me is my biggest comfort game and franchise in general, I think. It's been with me my whole life, basically, as long as I've had solid memories, at least. And I don't know, I look forward to it continuously intertwining itself with my life and being with me when I want to revisit an older gen, and hopefully with me in future installments that continue to move the franchise forward. Oh, also, how did I not talk about this? Ash Ketchum becoming a Pokemon champion, and then him leaving the anime. Like, that was a big deal, too. I can't believe I almost forgot that. It was like 20 plus years in the making. That scene where a bunch of his Pokemon were there in spirit from like his whole past, and his winning moment was such a huge blast of nostalgia. It was just really cool. But anyway, before I wrap this up, I really want to know like what you think or what you remember your first ever party looking like and in what game. I know for most of us it'll likely be Pokemon Red. But if there's a younger audience watching all the way through, it could be Gold or Emerald. Mine, like I said, was Red, and I'll never forget my party of my very first complete playthrough, my first championship team. It was Charizard, Butterfree, Pidgeot, Nidoking, Raichu, and Poliwhirl.